and welcome to today's talk in the Self-Love and Self-Care Summit. Our self-love expert today is Athena Wolf. She's here to share how we can heal ourselves with Ayurveda. Athena has been treating chronic disease, emotional wounds, and trauma for the past 16 years with holistic healing. Athena, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking with you this morning.
And I'm glad to have you here too. As someone who trained in Ayurveda myself, I have an affinity for this science of medicine, the science of healing, and finding balance in the different areas that it forces us to be a little bit more self-aware of what's going on in our bodies and how we're reacting to certain things. So I love having your expertise here to share this new perspective. Can you ground everybody with just an overview of what Ayurveda really is?
Ayurveda, I think of it as a manual for your life, and that's for your individual life, not for everybody's life, because that manual or those instructions are different for each person. And that's the beauty of Ayurveda, is its specificity. So Ayurveda began, some people say 5,000 years ago. I know Graham Hancock, if some of you follow Graham Hancock, he says it's probably older than 10,000 years, and I tend to agree with that. It was passed down orally for many thousands of years. Ayurveda is a revealed understanding of our deep connection with all of nature and how we can live in harmony and balance with nature and with our own nature.
I love that. What a beautiful description. And there's that harmony and the balance. And when we're, this is a summit all about self-love and self-care. And when we're not spending the time on self-care, if we don't have this awareness of really what's going on and how we're feeling and how we're reacting to things, then we get so thrown out of balance. Why do you think that it is a bit of a struggle when it comes to self-love and self-care, maybe especially even for women? What's your perspective on why this can be such a challenge?
My perspective from seeing hundreds of women is that our culture has a great deal to do with that imbalance and illness that women suffer from. We live in this is my opinion from my, from my experiences. We live in a very violent and patriarchal society. Most of the women I treat for cancer, for instance, have been sexually abused. I'd say 99% of them. That is a profound violation that not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually that needs to be healed. So the culture has a lot to do with it. Our culture tends to tell women that we should always be givers. We should take care of everybody else and make ourselves last. And that's not balance. That's not self-respect. Women need to take care of themselves first. It's almost a cliche, but I'll say this anyway. It's like when you fly in an airplane, the stewardess always says, if the mask comes down, put your mask on first, then put it on others. And that's like a basic thing. If you haven't taken care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you made a point on, the women that you treat, and it sounds like there's this correlation between trauma and that we've experienced in the past and our own physical health. Is that so?
Definitely. It's so. So I'm an Ayurvedic physician, or Vediya. I'm also a curandera. I practice curanderismo in Mexico with the medicine man of the Yaquis in Tecate. This is the man that in Mexico is known as Don Juan. So from these teachings and an experience that I have in curanderismo, I do energy work with women who have suffered various kinds of trauma. Sexual abuse is one, and it's probably the worst. I've also worked with many people who've been physically tortured I've worked with people who've been in a severe car accident. That is traumatic. People who've lost a family member, people who've gone without food for a long period of time. There's many different causes of trauma. And to deal with it holistically, we need to understand how to change the lifestyle. A lot of times people who've had a traumatic event will go on with kind of a fight or flight reaction and not be able to go back into normal life. And so making them aware of adjusting their lifestyle to begin living normally again. But the most important part, I think, is the energy work. In curanderismo, we call the cleansing of the electromagnetic field or soul. We call this the limpia. That is the energetic cleansing, because what happens when we experience a trauma, many times, not all the time, but many times people will hold the emotions from that trauma in their electromagnetic field. And those heavy emotions become a filter so that the love of Creator is blocked, usually through the energetic systems we know as chakras. So in the Ayurvedic healing tradition, which is conveyed through Sanskrit, most people are familiar with the word chakra. That's a Sanskrit word. In the Mayan tradition, known as curanderismo, the Mayan word for that is chakra. Also, kundalini in Sanskrit, in the Mayan word, is known as kundalini. They're very similar systems, and I believe that's because, well, I won't get into the whole history of why they're related. But so the limpia is one way to release those heavy emotions. I send them to the earth to be mulched. That is the beginning of the energetic healing for trauma. We call trauma susto in curanderismo, and for most kinds of susto, it's also required to do what we call a soul retrieval. And that is because when we experience some heavy trauma, some terrible incident in our lives, people often tell themselves, this is so terrible, I can't be here for this, I can't experience. And so a part of that person leaves. Actually, a part of your soul leaves. And then that person, it's a self-defense mechanism. People do the best they can in a difficult situation. That part of the soul leaves, and then that person feels numb, like they're not all there, because they're not. And eventually, most people want to feel like they're totally here, that they can fully experience their lives. And to do that, one of the ways to do that is soul retrieval. There may be other ways as well, but that's the technique that I use as a curandera.
So when we experience that, say we've had a trauma, it could be a large trauma like those you described, or maybe even just some small traumas. Maybe we had some, emotional difficulties as a child, or any type of trauma where you see that happening. You said a couple of different things can happen. You said we get in a state of this fight or flight response just almost perpetually throughout, our lives, or as well as this part of your soul might leave because I just can't handle this. How does this manifest? Like what's the result? What are some different ways that this shows up maybe in our body, in our lives, when we're in those states?
Well, I think it shows up differently in different people. One thing I've mentioned already is cancer. That's I could say 98 or 99% of the people I treat with cancer have suffered sexual abuse or some kind of trauma in that way. Sometimes it was not assault or rape as much as just abuse. Sometimes heavy emotional abuse or torture. So these manifest in physical diseases. Sometimes it's just a feeling of being stressed all the time. And I do help people with different herbal remedies for that kind of stress, just to bring things down. These herbal remedies are very, very healing. They don't, they're gentle. They don't mess up your system in the way that drugs do. Other symptoms of that kind of stress from trauma would be, again, feeling numb. Oftentimes there are certain patterns in the person's life that will happen without any input from them. And they don't understand why. For instance, I treated one woman who had a series of car accidents, a lot, like 8 car accidents, none of which were her fault. And when doing the soul retrieval, we found that there was something that had happened to her in a past life that was unhealed. And that's why this pattern kept recurring. So you are a trauma therapist, aren't you? What kind of results do you see in people's lives from trauma?
That's a good question. It's funny. I don't think of myself as, a trauma coach, but really what, the women who come to me who are dealing with anxiety, dealing with these inner thoughts saying, you're not good enough, you can't do this, everyone's better than you. And so it's like this abuse is coming from within. And a lot of times it's learned behavior. I think probably most times it's learned behavior. Either they were the recipient of it, or they saw their parents acting in that way, or it's just, culture and, saying there's failure as an option. And okay, well, I failed. Does that mean I'm a failure? And so this beating themselves up is coming from within. And, I was there myself. And what I saw in myself was, physically speaking, headaches every day, tension headaches. 2:00 would roll around, boom, headache every day. I had insomnia, I had anxiety driven insomnia, because my mind just would not stop spinning and moving and moving. And, and I was just having a conversation with a client the other day on the kind of the neurological, the nervous system experience of just this feeling of buzzing. Like you feel like your nervous system is on high alert. Like every nerve ending is like a wire that's pulled tight. And of course, digestion was an absolute disaster for me. Between just, if I didn't have a stomach ache, I was nauseous or I was bloated. I looked 6 months pregnant often because my stomach would just bow out to here. And it's so funny, in our culture, we treat the symptoms, right? I went to the doctor for my stomach. I went to the doctor for my insomnia or for my headaches. And, in that kind of Western culture perspective, we treat the symptoms, and it's, you want symptom relief, of course, but you have to get down to the root of the problem. And it manifests physically like that. It manifests in our lives too, and not having the courage to speak up for ourselves, or feeling like we have the permission to create boundaries, like we need these boundaries, or even just the courage to move forward and do the things that we want to do in life. So it's so crazy, the amount of effects that these different ways of thinking can really manifest in our lives. Is that what you end up seeing too in your practice?
I do. I think you've delineated those results very well. I do treat a lot of people who have feelings of insecurity, and they do things that are detrimental to them. And a lot of times they have these voices in their head which are most of the time their parents' voices saying, oh, you're just a bad person, you're fat, you're ugly, you're whatever, because many people lack parenting skills and their own wounds are not healed. So in curanderismo, we think of that as a curse. It's not usually a deliberate curse that parents do. It's just they have this pattern and they pass it on to their children. So eliminating those voices that are detrimental to you are really important. The first thing that I look at whenever I treat anyone is their digestive system, because our digestion is the foundation of our health or our disease. And that's the first thing to bring back into balance is your digestive system.
And I'm glad you actually brought that up, to be honest, is the connection. Can you describe that or explain the connection, that mind-body connection between what's going on up here and what happens down here as a result?
Well, it's a funny thing. Even in our culture, there's a saying that, I feel this in my gut, because there's a link to from your digestive system to your brain. And even I've treated people with brain tumors whose inflammation always began in their digestive system, and it spread throughout their nerves as well. So yeah, any kind of stress is going to throw your digestive system off. And there's so many diseases that come mostly from stress, also from poor eating habits or not knowing the type of foods to eat. There's diverticulitis and appendicitis, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. All of these things I treat with diet and certain herbal remedies, but you have to also heal that stress that's going on in your mind for your digestive system to heal.
Yeah, it's amazing that your thoughts can help heal your body, which also means your thoughts can also harm your body.
Exactly.
We don't quite understand the full power and magnitude of what we can do with this up here. And I know another really prevalent issue that shows up, especially among women dealing with stress, dealing with anxiety. It stems from doesn't stem from our thyroid, but it affects our thyroid. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yes, and when I do the limpia on people, and I do this at a distance, I look at their whole electromagnetic field from a distance because, of course, time and space is an illusion. We can energetically see through that. So more women have problems at their throat chakra than men. And that again goes back to our culture, because our culture tells women, be nice, just say what other people want to hear. But conversely, what our society needs to heal is to hear women speak the truth. There's nothing more powerful than a woman speaking the truth. And we can do that in ways that are kind and gentle and without adding extra emotion to it. Because when you speak your truth and you add a lot of emotion, then that's all people get is the emotion. They don't even hear what you're saying. And so that's what I see most often in women, is that there's clouds around their throat chakra, sometimes walls, sometimes barbed wire. And very often those women have put those boundaries there themselves to keep them from speaking their truth. And of course, when you have that energetic blockage around your throat, it's going to affect your thyroid as well. And there's an epidemic of low thyroid in this country. I do treat people all over the world, but I haven't treated enough to make a generalization about women in other cultures. So yeah, it's something that's very prevalent, and doctors have noticed this and are making huge sums of money testing people for the state of their thyroid. What I found is that the blood chemistry test is actually not as accurate an indication of the state of your thyroid as your own body temperature. And that's why I have this, I posted this way to check your own thyroid at home for free as a way to empower people to understand their own bodies. We don't need an interpreter. Sometimes we need coaching, we need more information, we may need help, but it's good to have these tools to understand what's going on in our own bodies.
Like different self-awareness tools is what we're getting at, really, right? Is this being able to say, okay, there's something going on here, let's tap into this. And I mean, just like a simple example is, from the Ayurvedic perspective, I am a Pitta. And, there's a fiery element to Pitta. And I, after having learned a little bit more about finding balance in my life through the Ayurvedic perspective, it started to make a ton of sense to me why I cannot skip lunch. I can't. I not only will I will get a massive headache, I will be incredibly irritable. And when I finally do eat, there's no amount of food that will satiate me in that moment. And I know that. But because of my Pitta nature, I also have a tendency to push through and just keep going regardless, and I know I easily could have skipped lunch today, but I know I have this beautiful talk with you and another one right after that and another one right after that. And so that self-awareness of recognizing, oh, this is what happens when I don't do that. And I had to make this mistake hundreds and hundreds of times before the light bulb went off and, oh, I can't skip lunch. And just this one small act of having a quick soup before getting on this call with you sets the tone and makes such a difference throughout the rest of my day. So it's just one little way to bring self-awareness. So when it comes to maybe the thyroid, what's something that maybe somebody watching this could just recognize in themselves that, oh, maybe I need to go take this thyroid test?
Well, you're very right about Pitta and Pitta as well. And we do not do well with skipping meals. This is another reason why Ayurveda is so helpful to people, because right now there's all kinds of people recommending fasting. Pitta people don't do well with fasting. We become hypoglycemic. Whereas Vata, people of Vata constitution actually forget to eat and don't have a lot of appetite. They don't do well with fasting either. The only dosha that does well with fasting is Kapha. And Kapha people tend to eat too much anyway and gain a lot of weight. So fasting is really cleansing for Kapha people. There are instances where fasting can be helpful, but it's very different from the Ayurvedic point of view than the way that allopathy uses it. So to answer your question about how you might recognize that it would be good to test yourself for the state of your thyroid, people who have low thyroid, and most people don't have all these symptoms, but these are some of the symptoms that could indicate low thyroid. That is, your hair begins to thin, the lower third of your eyebrows thins out and sometimes kind of disappears. People with low thyroid tend to feel very lethargic and tired, and often depressed, and they just don't have enough energy to get going to do anything. Oftentimes weight gain, especially in your stomach, when you have low thyroid. So Hashimoto's often accompanies low thyroid. It is a different imbalance. It is an autoimmune disorder, and there's a lot of inflammation involved with Hashimoto's. And I have a different treatment for Hashimoto's than for low thyroid. And of course, hyperthyroid has a very different symptoms, and that's a thyroid imbalance as well. Hyperthyroid is a more advanced thyroid imbalance. People often begin with low thyroid, and then if you take, say iodine is a big cause of hyperthyroid. People want to take iodine for their low thyroid, and it's a big thing it's a fad. I'm sorry to say. It's my perspective. Right now, the fad with naturopaths is to give people iodine for their low thyroid. And it's caused a great deal of problems for people. They tend to go into hyperthyroid, thyrotoxicosis, something called the Wolff-Chaikoff effect. I don't recommend using iodine or ingesting iodine for anything. People who have hyperthyroid tend to feel very speeded up, right? And they tend to lose a lot of weight and get very thin.
So if you're experiencing any of that, I mean, this has been a core theme in all of these talks throughout this whole summit, is bringing this self-awareness into, okay, what am I thinking right now? But not just that, but what am I feeling right now? What am I experiencing? What are some symptoms that I'm seeing coming up? And if you're, dealing with any of these types of symptoms that Athena described, she does have this free at-home thyroid test that you can take. And the link for that is right below this video.
Yes, and you don't need to click on anything. You just read it. I just put it out on my website so that people can read it and do it. My web post requires that I have some cart below it, but I'm not collecting information on anybody. You don't need to click on that. Just read it and do it.
Awesome. Easy as that.
Yeah.
Athena, I got a question for you because, we talked about this a little bit, which is how our thoughts can really manifest some imbalances and create some harm and some changes in our bodies as a result. So for the woman who's so hard on herself and, has this voice inside her head that's just cutting her down and is really hard on herself, what's your best piece of advice to leave her with?
My advice for people in general, and especially women who are feeling that they're not good enough or are feeling insecure, is this: live with integrity. Keep your word to people. Respect yourself and respect all nature, including all of our relations. That is, all the two-legged, four-legged, plant people, all life on this good earth. And know yourself. Do the work to truly understand who you are, body, soul, and mind.
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you so much, Athena, for your wisdom and sharing all this great perspective and knowledge with everybody here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you, and thank you for doing this for all of us so that people can acquire more tools to understand how to heal themselves. It's so important.
Well, thank you so much. And to everybody else, bye-bye.